Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Siddharth Mukherjee from Ambedkar University, Lucknow. Today we are going to talk about the module Impact of Modernity on Class from the paper Comparative Politics, Politics of Advanced Industrial Societies. To begin with, I'll make certain introductory remarks, and at the outset I would mention the definition of class as given by Stuart Morris, a very well-known scholar of politics. Morris defines class as a group in itself, as an objective social cleavage, and for itself as a socio-economic group or category with a collective identity, a common political action. So what brings members of a class together is a sense of collective identity and a common political action. Historically, class divisions in modern Europe resulted from the phenomena of industrialization and urbanization. Industrialization led to the emergence of two major classes in modern capitalist societies of West Europe. That's the capitalist class, who owned the means of production, and the labor class, who were made to work in the factories owned by the capitalist class. It has been found that class division has been an important determinant of political development or trajectory in modern Western societies. The main objectives of this module are as follows. In the first part, I would first be discussing and analyzing the major theories linking modernity with class. Then I would look at the contemporary schemes of class analysis in the Western world. This module will specifically try to understand social class in Western Europe, and in this context I would be referring to the nature of class structure in different countries of West Europe. I would also look at class and political mobilization in modern European societies. As we know that class is a very important source of political mobilization, as the political parties have exploited the cleavages based on class to get the votes of the people. And subsequently, we would find that there is a clear-cut and a conceptual link between class and electoral politics. The class identity has been played out by different political parties in order to get the votes of different social categories. And we would find that different groups have voted for different parties, and parties have had their political base amongst specific classes. Now students, let me explain some of the important theoretical positions on class. The most significant theories of class has been that of Marxism. In fact, Marxism has been one of the most important ideologies or philosophies to understand the relationship between class and politics in modern Western societies. Now, Marx believed that class divisions emerge from relations of production. As we know that capitalism changed the relations of production and introduced new means and modes of production. And as a result of this changing mode of production, new classes emerged. But the classes were not in an equal position in the society. There was a hierarchical relationship between the two classes that emerged from this relations of production. The concept of class has been well elaborated in some of the very well-known texts of Marx, which are the German Ideology, the 18th Brumaire, the Class Struggles in France 1848-50, and Das Kapital. All these texts are very important from the standpoint of understanding the social relationships on the basis of class divisions in Western European industrial societies. Other smaller classes that have been identified by Marx in capitalist societies are financial aristocracy, peasantry, bureaucrats, and professionals. One class that has been found to play a very significant role in capitalist society is the petty bourgeois class. In many cases, the exploitation is done by the petty bourgeois class. Now, who is a petty bourgeois. Petty bourgeois is a particular class in the capitalist society. Petty bourgeois, according to Marx, refers to small property owners. It's a class that owns smaller means of production without employing wage labor, and it also refers to the lower rungs of management in private companies. And this class plays a very significant role in maintaining the capitalist system, primarily because they are large in number. Now I would talk about two major versions of Marxism, which are instrumental Marxism and structural Marxism. Let me mention about instrumental Marxism. What is instrumental Marxism? And who are the advocates of instrumental Marxism? The two major advocates of instrumental Marxism are G. William Domhoff and Ralph Miliband. What is the basic assumption of instrumental Marxism? The basic assumption of instrumental Marxism is, or the basic argument of instrumental Marxism is that a modern capitalist state is an instrument of the dominant class. So the state would act and do what the capitalist class directs it to do. So the capitalist state is totally under the control of the capitalist class, and the capitalist state only serves the interests of the capitalist class at the cost of the interests of other sections of the society. Now Miliband says that the elites, which primarily refers to the capitalist class, have captured power, and the policies of the state clearly reflect the preferences of the capitalist class, which, according to Miliband, constitute the elite in modern Western societies. Now I would mention one of the very important approaches that tries to understand the relationship between class and politics, especially from a comparative perspective. And this is the structural approach. The major argument or the central argument of the structural approach is that state, instead of being manipulated by the capitalist class, operates according to development of capitalism. In other words, this particular approach tries to question the claim that capitalist state is simply an instrument of the capitalist class. According to this approach, state maintains its relative autonomy, but tries to come up with policies and laws that tends to preserve the system of capitalism. And this is something that had happened in most of the West European societies, where the state had come up with policies, laws, etc., that has tried to promote market economy and preserve capitalism in such societies. The main advocates of this particular approach of relationship between class and politics, and the relationship and the overall relationship with modernity, are Althusser and Nikos Poulantzas. Now let me explain the viewpoint of Poulantzas, who is one of the major advocates of structuralist approach of class and politics. Poulantzas basically mentions three basic premises to understand class in a modern society. Now I'll mention these three premises. The first premise that Poulantzas mentions is that class in advanced capitalist society is a reflection of antagonistic social relations and struggle. So class in that sense becomes a basis to understand the contradictions in the social relationships between different groups in such societies. The second point that Poulantzas mentions is that classes are structured at economic, political and ideological levels. So class has a basis at all these three levels. Or in other words, class influences the economy, rather it emerges from the economic means of production. Class becomes an important source of political mobilization, and class also becomes an ideology that tries to maintain a certain kind of social system, or in the other sense, it also becomes an ideology that becomes a basis of struggle against another class. The third important premise is that class positions are structured through division of labor. So one's position in the class hierarchy would be determined by the task or the function that is being performed by the individual in this hierarchical division of labor. Now, another very important scholar who tries to understand the relationship between class, politics and modernity is Max Weber. What is Max Weber's position on the relationship between class and politics? According to Max Weber, class relationships are a natural outcome of distribution of resources as capital, product and labor. Max Weber primarily focuses on the status group in view of common lifestyle, social esteem and honor. So he believes that this class or the capitalist class or the business class appears to be different from other classes, not only in terms of their ownership of the means of production, but also in terms of their lifestyle, social esteem, honor and prestige in the society. Now I would discuss about another very significant theory that tries to establish the relationship between class, politics and modernity, and this theory is known as the power elite theory. This theory is completely in contrast with the Marxian theory of class and social relations in modern industrial societies. Now, who are the advocates of the power elite theory? There are mainly three advocates of this theory: Mosca, Pareto and C. Wright Mills. The central argument of this theory is that the society is naturally governed by few, whom these scholars would call as elites, who are distinguished from the majority or mass of people by virtue of their social status, power and position in the society. So this particular class, which these scholars would call as elites, appear to be very different from rest of the masses in view of the power, social status and wealth that they enjoy in the society. Pareto, one of the scholars or advocates of the power elite theory, gave the concept of circulation of elites, which means that the elites do not remain permanent. One set of elites may be replaced by another set of elites. So at different points of times, we may have different set of elites ruling in the society. And finally, Mosca makes a clear distinction between elites and masses in view of the position that these two social categories assume in the society. While elites are different by virtue of their social status, power and position, masses are considered to be incapable, ignorant and do not have the capacity of exercising power and control in politics and society. Now I would mention another very important strand of class politics or the theory of class politics, which is pluralism. Pluralism is critical of the elitist theory of class and power in Western societies. According to pluralism, the power distribution in society cannot be understood in terms of the division between elites and masses. In other words, they believe that power is not simply concentrated in elites. Rather, there is a dispersion or distribution of power between different groups in the society. So power and authority is not concentrated in elites, rather it is exercised by different groups in the society who, by virtue of their power and position, compete for access to resources and benefits of the state. The main advocates of this theory are Robert Dahl, Martin Lipset, Arnold Rose and David Truman. According to this theory, the state manages competition between groups and attempts to maintain political equilibrium. So in that sense, state becomes a neutral player in managing the competition for access to resources and benefits by groups in the society. Now let me come to the contemporary schemes of class analysis in Western world. And in this I would first mention the views of two scholars named Goldthorpe and Erikson. Now Goldthorpe and Erikson observes the existence of three major classes in contemporary modern Western societies. And these three classes are as follows. The first class refers to that class where the members buy labor. The second category refers to those who sell labor. And the third category, which is different from the first two categories, includes those who work independently. So neither they buy labor nor they sell labor. Secondly, John Scott, another very important scholar of class politics in Western society, believes that individual ownership has replaced joint shareholding in contemporary Western societies. During Industrial Revolution, the capitalists mainly included individual owners, but now we find that the companies and firms are owned jointly by different individuals. So in that sense, individual ownership has now been replaced by joint ownership or joint shareholding. And the shift from individual ownership to joint ownership has led to a transformation or change in the nature of class structure and class relations in contemporary Western societies. Another scholar named Darren Roff states that class differentiation results from bureaucratization, as a result of which two major classes have come into existence. And these two classes which have been identified by Darren Roff are the service contract employees and the labor contract employees. To give an example, the service sector in Britain has certain new classes, and these classes are technical professionals, semi-skilled and unskilled laborers. Now, if you look at these classes closely, you would find a marked difference from the classes that existed during the Industrial Revolution. Now, let us understand social class more precisely in Western European societies. As we have talked about earlier, the concept of social class found its origin during Industrial Revolution that led to the establishment of capitalism or a capitalist society. To begin with, Karl Marx and Engels were the two scholars to identify two major classes that emerged from Industrial Revolution. And these classes are the industrial workers, who are normally referred to as the proletariat class, and the industrial capitalists, who are normally called as bourgeois class. The origin of modern ideas, according to them, is closely linked with bourgeois interests. So modernization has primarily served, or modern institutions have primarily served the interests of the bourgeois class at the cost of the interests of the labor and the other marginalized groups in the society. Coming to the view of another very important scholar called Ellen Mixens, who tries to understand the nature of French bourgeois. According to Ellen, French bourgeois posed a challenge to aristocratic particularism. So their emergence in France was a very significant move in overthrowing the aristocracy that emerged from the feudal system in the French society. In that sense, the bourgeois class did act as an agent of democratization, an aspect which Marx and Engels would also probably did not ignore. Alfred Cockburn believes that the above is a myth, as the process was led by professionals. So according to Cockburn, all these scholars tend to ignore the role of the professional class in the advent of modernization in Western societies. Now students, we will talk about social class and modernity in a comparative framework. And in this, I would try to understand class relations or nature of class structure in different societies of the West. I would first start with Britain. In Britain, class distinctions were applied in the political sphere by placing property qualifications for voting rights. As we know that Industrial Revolution did not completely democratize the British society. Rather, Industrial Revolution created class divisions and denied a large mass of people who belonged to the lower class one of the most basic rights, which is the voting right. And these classes, particularly the industrial workers and the agricultural labor, had to lead a long struggle in order to get their voting rights. The Reform Acts of 1867 and 1884 in Britain are very significant in this regard. These two acts extended voting rights to the industrial workers and the agricultural labor respectively. In France, universal adult franchise was established in 1848. But one particular community which comprised almost one half of the population, that is women, had still not got their voting rights. But certainly the two major classes which were denied of this right for a long time got their voting rights by 1848. In Germany, the feudalism continued as late as the middle of 20th century. Now we would try to understand class as the basis of political mobilization in modern Europe. In fact, class has been one of the basic source of social cleavage and also political mobilization in modern Western societies. It has been found that mounting exploitation of labor class spurred trade union movements in Europe. By the end of 19th century, early 20th century, many labor organizations and trade unions came up to demand for the rights of the labor class. They observed that the capitalist system had done a lot of harm to the labor class. While capitalism led to development or growth of the capitalist class, on the other hand, it gave wretched lives to the labor class. So it created a sort of division in the society where certain class or the capitalist class was able to get the benefits of market economy and capitalism, whereas a large mass of people were excluded from the benefits and they led wretched lives. They were not able to avail the benefits that were available to the capitalist class. Let me mention one example here. Britain. In Britain, there was a movement called the Chartist movement which took place between 1837 and 1842. This movement was mainly centered around the demand for the rights of the labor class. It was a very powerful and a strong movement that put pressure on the government to protect and preserve the rights of the labor class. Let me explain a little bit about this movement. The movement was not a radical movement, it was a moderate movement. Which meant that the movement was not intended at transforming the regime. It was only directed towards bringing about changes within the political system so as to accommodate the interests of the labor class. Therefore, the movement was not antagonistic to liberal democracy. Rather, the movement tried to bring about changes or modify the principles of liberalism so that equality could be established in the society. But in contrast to Britain, in countries like Russia, Imperial Germany and pre-war Spain, these movements took a radical turn. There was a radicalization of trade union movements or movements against capitalism or feudalism in these countries. As we know, that radicalization of movement led to a complete transformation of and change of regime in the countries that I have mentioned. In Russia, we find Russia is a classic example of this, where the radicalization of movement, or social revolution that was led by Communist Party led to a shift from feudalism, or changeover from a feudalism to socialism. Same was the case with other countries where trade unionism or radicalization of trade union movements led to emergence of authoritarianism. Now, students, let me explain you a little bit about political mobilization on the basis of class, or how class has emerged as a source of political mobilization in different societies of the West. Enfranchisement of industrial labor, as we know, has transformed class from a social status to a source of political mobilization. So today, class has been politicized, and class identity is used as a basis for mobilizing people to get their votes. So in that sense, modernization has led to politicization of class cleavages in Western societies. Class has also become a basis of the formation of radical socialist and labor parties in different European countries. In Britain, Labour Party was formed on the basis of class. The party was mainly formed to ameliorate the conditions of the labour class, but did not resort to radicalization of politics. They wanted to assert the demands of the labour class within the framework of liberal democracies. So in that sense, the Labour Party of Britain was not a supporter of radicalization as the communist parties, but they wanted to bring about changes incrementally, and like other parties, intended to preserve the liberal democratic system. This party derived its support from the poor and underprivileged classes, primarily because it raised the cause of these classes, and whenever it came to power, it tried to accommodate the interest and aspirations of the underprivileged and the marginalized classes in the British society. In fact, if we look at the policies framed by Labour Party, we would find that most of these policies have been intended or have been formulated primarily to ameliorate, to improve the conditions of these classes. So the social security measures that have been advanced by the Labour Party have been far more influential, have been far more significant than those which were being advanced by the Conservative Party. Class politics is also visible in the difference in party support in the United States. In other words, we clearly find class politics as a source as a basis of differentiation of party support in United States, in the sense that the weaker class, the marginalized section, including the marginalized ethnic groups, vote for Democrats, while the affluent sections mainly vote for Republican Party. So this kind of a class distinction in party support is clearly visible in United States, and this is a trend which still continues to exist. Although the class cleavages may have weakened because of the salience of ethnic cleavages in the American society. Now let me come to France. In France, class mobilization has been very prominent, and class mobilization has led to the emergence of socialist and communist parties, which have been far more radical in their action than the Labour parties or the Social Democrat parties in Britain, or the Democrats in United States. Though these parties have operated within the framework of liberal democracy and have not really made any serious attempt to radicalize politics on the basis of class in France. Now let us try and understand politics or identity politics in 20th century Western world from a comparative perspective. we find a clear-cut transformation of class relations in 20th century with social mobility. So there is a clear-cut change in the nature of class politics. This has happened also because of the emergence of new classes that have played a very significant role in the politics of these societies. For example, the role of service class in contemporary Western societies is something that requires serious attention. Comparative research on voting behavior shows that Britain and Scandinavian countries still witness high levels of class-based voting, while it is low in case of US and Canada. Although ethnic cleavages have overtaken class cleavages in British society, but the existence or the impact of class on voting still continues in some form or the other in Britain. In Germany, class links with politics are very strong. And here we find that, and this is clearly indicated by the fact that the working class mainly votes for the Social Democrat Party, which is more oriented towards the left, and the business and the affluent classes of the German society mainly support the Christian Democratic Union, which is the rightist party in Germany. Now I shall come to the class analysis which is offered by Richard Rose, another very important scholar of British politics. Before I come to Richard Rose's analysis of class politics in contemporary Britain, I would like to mention that Richard Rose has done an extensive study of British politics, and his study has mainly focused on both the nature of political institution and political process in Britain at different points of time. As per the empirical analysis done by Richard Rose, there has been a weakening of class ties in 2001 British parliamentary election. In his analysis, he finds that no party won more than half of the middle class votes. So in that sense, he is trying to state that the class politics is slowly eroding in Britain, or probably class politics has been undermined by the growing salience or other kinds of identity politics like ethnic politics in Britain. He's also shown in his empirical analysis that only 2/5 of the middle class vote went to Conservative and Labour class vote for the Labour Party due to cross-class appeal by both the political parties. So basically, he's trying to show that the traditional voting basis, the voters base of the two major parties in Britain is shifting. And it's not necessary that the lower classes or the marginalized classes in British society would in toto vote for the Labour Party, and the middle class or the affluent class in toto would vote for the Conservative Party. So there is a cross-class appeal, there's a trend of cross-class appeal by both the political parties, and these political parties are no more trying to appeal to their traditional support base, rather they are trying to appeal to all classes. Finally, Richard Rose shows in his empirical study that less than 1 out of 7 voters belong to conventional middle class or employee or workers categories. So students, let us summarize the points that we have discussed in this module on the relationship between class, politics and modernity. I would basically mention 3 important points here. The first point is that with the progress of modernity, the class relations are transforming in Western societies. So we do not have the old class structure that existed in classical Western societies. The changes in the social and economic structures of these society has led to the emergence of new classes, and this has led to a change in the nature of class structure and class relations in Western societies. The second important point is that class still holds an important place in political mobilization, although ethnic divisions have assumed salience in recent years. As we know, that class has always been an important source of political mobilization, and class as a basis of political mobilization still exists as a phenomena in Western societies, but subsequently class cleavages are being undermined by ethnic divisions, and therefore ethnicity is becoming a source of political mobilization or political divisions or political conflicts in Western societies rather than class. The third point that I have discussed in my module is that the Marxian theory of class becomes widely questioned today. In the wake of transforming class relations in Western societies and emergence of welfare state, there was a general fear by the turn of the 19th century and the early 20th century that if the government dominated by the capitalist class does not moderate the system of capitalism, then it might lead to the emergence of communism in Western societies. So in order to come out of this situation, the scholars and the philosophers of liberalism try to remodify liberalism by introducing a welfare state that tries to give certain amount of social security to the labor and the other marginalized sections of the society, but at the same time maintaining the fundamentals of a liberal political system. And this is exactly what has happened in most of the Western societies. So Marxism has lost its relevance in those societies where welfare state has come up, because now it is felt that welfare states would be able to take care of the interests of the poor or the marginalized classes, and therefore a philosophy of Marxism or a Marxist movement may not be required in countries where welfare states have been operating successfully. Thank you.